Hello and welcome to another episode of Agri-History, Tropical Edition. In this episode, we'll cover the origins of coconut, as well as its history and domestication. First, you'll cover its early history in prehistoric texts and lore. In South and Southeast Asia, especially Sri Lanka and India, various historical texts show that the coconut plays a very important part in the culture of these societies, including traditions and religions, especially Hinduism and Buddhism. Hindu and Buddhist texts are filled with metaphors, symbolisms, and many references to the coconut. And prior to being written down, these Hindu and Buddhist scriptures, especially the Hindu ones which were written 3,000 years ago, would have been carried along through oral tradition. This seems to be paralleled in the Australasian islands like Papua New Guinea, New Zealand, and Australia in these native cultures. Now on to a litany of different studies that talk about the origins and history of this species. There have been very few studies on the origins of coconut, but amongst the hypotheses made, several stand out as very possible origin points of the coconut. Dr. Ken Dole modified his 1882 hypotheses of the origin of the coconut. He changed it from the South American areas to the Indian archipelago. His prior hypothesis was due to the fact that most of the close relatives of the coconut are found in South America. Dr. Kendall arrived at his new decision because of his experience of Hindu culture, which had a long history of coconut use. Dr. Cook remained a supporter of the South American hypothesis, again due to the fact that most of the wild relatives of coconut are found in South America. Although during that time, there was speculation of pre-Columbian trade between the Americas and the East Asians, although no archaeological evidence has yet appeared. Dr. Bakari came up with the hypothesis that the coconut is African in origin due to many of the wild relatives of the coconut being also found in Africa. As such, there's wild relatives of coconut found both in Africa and South America. Dr. Thapar suggested yet another hypothesis that coconuts are not domesticated, but are in fact wild and native to many regions, and some populations are semi-domesticated. Dr. Child suggested that the Old World is the best option for the origin of the coconut, but further suggested that due to the movement of coconut through the ocean, it is unlikely we will ever know the exact origin of the species. Dr. Pursglove found that most of the pests of coconut Melanesia, and from there, he speculated that the coconut may have evolved there, although this hypothesis was disproven by later authors. Dr. Whitehead later on proposed the origin of the coconut to be some island off of Sri Lanka or India, or an extinct island in that similar area. He likewise endorsed the idea that the coconut evolved from the species Jubaropsis cafra, which came from Africa. During these studies, many fossils of both nuts, pollen, and remains have been dated. The oldest sample we have is fossilized pollen from 8,600 BP. This pollen was found on the Cook's Islands, known as Attio and Mangia. As of yet, we do not know the immediate progenitor of the species, and in fact, this species may have gone extinct a long time ago. Although the coconut is closely related to Coco nutifolia, although we do not know if this is the progenitor species or not. Now time to finish this episode up. Of the studies mentioned, some have been disproved and some have been somewhat vindicated. For instance, Dr. Soar was correct that these species were semi-domesticated, due to the fact that, through genetic studies, these plants still show a lot of wild character traits, including in yield. There's also been a study that suggests that there's been heavy selection for an increased size of the nut. Unfortunately, coconut is not the usual domesticated crop because this crop is used for multiple purposes, and as such, higher yield in one specific plant part was not selected for, but rather an overall change in the increase of plant parts. And different cultures had different desires for what the coconut is used for. India, for instance, preferred smaller sized coconuts for making ball copra. The Pacific Islanders seem to have selected for higher volumes of coconut water, and the Maldives seem to have selected for larger fruit and more nuts. It appears that there's different selective variables depending on the region of the world it was selected from. Well, that about covers everything. Stay tuned for the next episode of Agri History, Tropical Edition. Hope to see you then.